When the topic of restitution comes up, what comes to mind? Probably some old dusty objects from some faraway place in some boring old museum, right? While all of that might be true, what about your material heritage? Maybe even the remains of your ancestors that lie in these museums. Your bloodline may be directly connected to the history that exists in these museums. Well, for centuries, 2 to be exact, Africans have been making claims for the return of their heritage and even for the return of human remains of our ancestors. And this history is one that has rung out across the world, directed from Africa. Scholars say that as much as 90% of sub-Saharan heritage is currently outside of the continent. That means only 10% of our heritage is here in African museums and other African memory spaces. It's also not just about what was taken and how much, but also the racist historical narratives that have been created. Ideas such as Africans have no history, or even the idea that Africans can't make the art that's in the museums. One German explorer and racist wrote when encountering the extraordinary work of Africans, "I was moved to silent melancholy at the thought that this assembly of degenerate and feeble-minded posterity should be the legitimate guardians of so much loveliness." Many Africans have taken it upon themselves to rewrite this history and to tell a more accurate portrayal of African history and the realities of restitution from an African perspective, but also to think about what the future might be like. As Njoki Ngumi has said,
and so we need to realize that this conversation about reparations, restitution, return, object return, is definitely one that's going to take time. But even today, it's going to take a shorter time from today than it would have, a year ago, right? So it might take a long time. It may not even be us who see the objects come back. It might be our kids. It might not even be our kids. It might be the people who come after them. But we have to stand and hold ground and refuse to cede what we have in this moment right now, right? Because if we stop, then it means the ones who come after will have to start from here, which means they have a longer time to work to get the things that they want. So we have to gain as much ground as we can with the time that we have.
Well, let's get into that. Knowledge being produced on restitution has grown exponentially, 300% since 2016, and even more than that, by 500% since 1990, within academic literature alone. Enter the Benin bronzes. The Benin bronzes is an all-encompassing term referring to material culture seized in 1897 by the British Army from the palace of the Oba of the Kingdom of Benin, which is in present-day Nigeria. The Benin bronzes have come to represent and almost morally stand in for the broader debate around restitution of African heritage as a whole. On subjects such as the Benin bronzes, academic writing has grown 300%. But public discussion has grown even more, and on platforms such as Twitter, it has grown by as much as 600%. So here's the catch. Though there's been a lot of growth and a lot more attention on restitution, which is of course important, the voices of Africans themselves are not very well represented in this debate. Sounds contradictory, right? Well, let me explain. In 2020, non-Africans were on average 17 times more likely than Africans to be referenced, interviewed, or to author articles discussing the restitution of Benin bronzes based on Google search data. While we have just seen all of this incredible growth around the debate on restitution, when we compare academic citations, which means the degree to which an academic author is referenced or written about in the academic literature, we notice that the difference between non-African authors and African authors is incredibly stark. When looking at the top 10 writers and people quoted on restitution, Opoku is the leading African author in general public discussion on the topic of restitution, largely because of his own publishing online. After him, the most referenced African is Ghanaian David Adjaye, the globally celebrated architect who will lead the development of the new museum in Benin City, but otherwise unrelated to restitution concerns. It's important to note that Oba Obaranwem of Benin City or any of his descendants who have led the call for return since the 19th century do not feature in the top 10. However, a British professor and archaeologist towers over all Africans on this list and has emerged as the most prominent voice advocating for the return of the Benin bronzes. After him is the current French president, who launched a new frenzy of attention on restitution after a speech promising return in 2018. When we look at the list of the most prolific authors on the subject of restitution and the Benin bronzes, we see that far in the lead is the late Prince Folarin Shailon, a highly respected Nigerian academic and longtime activist who has worked on issues of restitution within the UN and across academia since the 1970s, and not the names that are most present and quoted about the subject. In fact, when we look at this list of the most visible voices on the subject, Shailon is only 19th on the list. It is, of course, really important to have those in solidarity and allies in the global north with African issues, but it is an indicator of how the system prioritizes some voices over others. However, at its worst, it also emphasizes the lack of trust and authority placed in African authors and voices who have the same, if not even more, knowledge on the subject. So what does this mean for all the important work happening on African restitution? Well, it means that we need to listen to Africans. And when we listen to Africans, we get a very different picture of the history and story of restitution. And when we look at the 2 centuries of work coming from Africans, we begin to engage with a very complex issue of what it means to rebuild a continent that has been taken from for so long. So what do we do about it? Well, from media houses to journalists to academic publishing, it's really important that there is more focus on who is being authored, cited, referenced, who is being heard. For you and for I, we can check ourselves. What are we reading? Who are we reading? Who's being interviewed? Who are we connecting with? What voices are we hearing? And what are we sharing on social media? You can visit www.openrestitution.africa, and there you'll find some really great resources to learn more about the subject and to share and connect with the great voices that have been doing important work on this subject.